What's up guys, Kudou here. So when I got home from work today, on a whim, I decided to go and fix up my old Queen Chrysalis deck. Now this day, I still don't really know who Queen Chrysalis is, or what importance she has to the show, or anything about her really. All I know is that she has one really good card in the MLP CCG that I very much love. A while ago, I made a white-pink deck around Queen Chrysalis's ability, and I decided to update the deck into almost a pure white deck, but with a splash of purple for reasons I'll get into later. Now the deck hasn't gone through any testing, and this is sort of the early draft stage of the deck building process, but I decided to go ahead and share it with you guys anyway. Maybe you guys can take a look at it, see if it's something you'd be interested in maybe trying out. This could be interesting, so without further ado, let's get that deck list up on the screen. As always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, and here it is, please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on the way out, although I will remind you that this is sort of a first draft and the deck isn't necessarily done. For the rest of us, let's take a closer look. So most people who follow MLP on my channel know about this card, Changeling Queen Chrysalis. Her flip condition is pretty simple. All you have to do is pay 3 action points to take control of one of your opponent's friends and flip her. It's not till the end of the turn, it's not till the end of the score phase, you permanently get to take control of one of your opponent's friends. Honestly, a pretty awesome flip condition, but the downside obviously is that after you actually flip, you don't have an effect anymore. So the core concept behind the deck, the entire reason it exists, the whole idea of it, the strategy, the kit and caboodle is take control of my opponent's friends, play the game with their cards instead of my own, because it's funny. That's literally it. So I've picked 3 cards that take control of my opponent's friends quite nicely, and we're going to play them to their fullest power. Pony Charm is pretty simple. You pay 3, you put it on a friend, and now you own that friend. Method Mares is kind of the same way. She's a 2-power pony, you put it in play, and as soon as you see your opponent play something you like, you can pay 2 action points and take control of it, and now it's yours. The last card, and probably my favorite, is Risky Business. So the way Risky Business works is you pick up your opponent's deck, you look through it for a character that you like, you set it to the side. Your opponent tries to guess which character it is you're taking from their deck. If they guess wrong, then you get to play it on your side of the field for free. If they guess right, then they get to play it on their side of the field for free. There's a few things about this that I find amazing. First, getting to pay 3 action points to look through your opponent's deck is busted. Even if that was the only effect, was look through your opponent's deck for 3 action points, that'd be pretty good. You can look through your opponent's deck, see what their deck strategy is, see what cards they're teching in. You can pretty much take a look at everything your opponent's planning on doing for the rest of the game. Next up, the most obvious one, your opponent's probably going to have a lot of different friends in their deck. So getting them to guess the exact friends that you're taking can be rather difficult on your opponent's part, as long as you're not super obvious about it. Like obviously if you just take like the most expensive best card in your opponent's deck and set it to the side and they guess it, then you're in trouble. But if you're clever about it, then you could get something for free that your opponent will never be able to guess. The other cool thing about that is because you technically put the card into play, if it has some kind of on-play effect, the effect triggers. This is the same wording clause, loophole, whatever you want to call it, that triggers when you play something that removes a card from play and then replays it onto the field. Again, this isn't necessarily like a high-class deck, but it is a lot of fun. Oh, it's that you're using a Frighten deck? Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of those Frighten cards, okay? I'm going to frighten some of your in-play cards. You know what? This is fun. I enjoy this. I enjoy using your cards. What is that, a cover-to-cover? I could use some action points. Let me just take control of that cover-to-cover and get action points every turn. I don't condone being a jerk out loud to your opponent during matches, because Lord knows that card games have enough jerks. Look into the Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh communities if you don't believe me. But in your head, you can laugh as much as you want. So as far as purple goes, these are the only purple cards we are going to be running. No events, no resources, no nothing. Some of you are going to look at this and say, wow, that's really dumb. You have 2 cards that have a color requirement of at least 2, and you're only running 1 card in your deck that can actually meet those color requirements. Well, hold on, okay. We're going to be taking a look at the reason why later. Just know that as far as I've seen, this works. Shouldn't have to explain too much of it. We're using cover to cover, and since you can only have 3 cover to covers in your deck, we're using 3 cover to cover and 3 Twilight Sparkle All-Team Organizer. I know a certain Phoenix Rightish fan of mine says that all Team Organizer is too slow right now. And yeah, it is. It really is. But it's got 2 power. And if you already have 3 cover to cover, then you should, well, there's no reason not to. And then Lady Justice is there because if something very terrible ends up happening and I absolutely need to meet those color requirements, I still have some hope of doing it in my deck. And also, I kind of still like her effect where she can give -1 power to all the ponies in front of her. I think it's still pretty nice. But yeah, this is legitimately the only reason we're going to be running purple is for the action point generation. Because one thing I found with this deck is it can get very costly. And if you have too many action points, you can just use the extra action points to draw more cards. Who cares? This is also a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to a small card that shall not be named. I think I've complained about it enough. There's a certain groundy card though, a card that stands on a plane level to mine that I'm definitely not a fan of, and this is a really good counter to that. People who know anything about the old deck know that it used to be white-pink, and I used to have a lot more of the other color and not just white. It's funny, I actually was thinking about calling this deck Cultural Appropriation, because it's just a bunch of white cards taking cards out of my opponent's deck and using them, but I have a feeling not many people will find it as funny as I do. But I found that while pink and white would be ideal for this deck, if the cards weren't so expensive, I would love to run a white and pink version of this deck, but I just found that the deck looks like it has more consistency with purple. I'll do more testing, but this is what I feel most comfortable with right now, because white can kind of stand on its own right now. Now, if we're just being completely honest with ourselves, the deck isn't very aggressive, and actually solving problems and getting points is going to be sort of a problem for this deck. So I am running sort of alternate cards that can act as a win condition if I need them to. Yes, I'm still running Rarity Truly Outrageous, okay? I don't care if anybody says that the card is outdated, that the card doesn't really work anymore, that I'm still using cards from base set, and that's really lame. I like Rarity Truly Outrageous. I think it still has a place in the meta, and I think it's a neat card for the deck. Granted, we're not getting as much use out of it in this deck as we do in most decks, because we're not using anything that has a really high bonus point in our problem deck, but I still like it. I still think it's a cool card. We're also using Photo Finish, say Jose, say Jose, say Jose. I don't know, guys. It's a really weird word. But we're using it because this is a pretty decent control deck, I feel. And if we can just keep our opponent from solving problems, we get 1 point every time they end their turn and they haven't been able to solve a problem. You get multiple of these guys in play, you control the field, and you sit back and you win the game. Easy. The other 2 white friends we're using are Photo Finish, Picture Perfect Pony. It's got a pretty amazing pumped effect. If you don't know what it is, if you win a face-off involving her, then you can get rid of one of your pumped cards to get rid of one of your opponent's friends. There's no requirements or anything. You win a Troublemaker face-off, you win a Problem face-off, you win an Event face-off, and you just sort of snap one pony out of existence. It's great. And then we're also using Sweetie Belle. I really like her showy effect. She's a really good 2-for-2 pony that you can just set out there. I'm not really worried about meeting her color requirements because you can just kind of flip Queen Chrysalis whenever you want to, and you can pay 1 to give her showy 3. It's optional. It's not always going to be super useful, but if your opponent and you just had a face-off or something and all of your opponent's ponies are at home, you can play this, showy 3, and it makes it really hard for your opponent to play around it. If I were going to start cutting stuff, Sweetie Belle could probably go first, but I like her, so for the moment I'm going to use her. So 2 more events we're going to use are Cracking the Case and Uh-Oh. Cracking the Case is just a really good utility card because it just straight out banishes a Troublemaker, and the great thing is it doesn't say a face-up Troublemaker, so as soon as your opponent drops a Troublemaker, if you don't want to deal with it, pay 1, it's gone, kick it back, I don't want to deal with it. And if it is face-up, you get rid of it anyways. You don't want to deal with Troublemakers, nobody does. And then we're using Uh-Oh. Uh-Oh's a pretty good just straight out control card. You pay 3, you kick something off, okay? You are the weakest link, goodbye, get off the stage. You don't even get to go to the discard pile, okay? You don't even get the dignity of going to the discard pile. You're literally just taken off of the game board. Of course, being a white deck, we've got even more accessories we can look at. Size is just a really fun card. You pay 1, you put it on one of your opponent's friends, and that friend slowly drains their action points every turn. And if your opponent can't pay for it, or is not willing to pay for it, then they discard it. And it's a lose-lose situation for your opponent. If your opponent does decide to keep it in play, how long are they going to keep it in play? How long is your opponent going to let it drain its resources? 5 turns? Lose 5 action points over a card that's probably not even worth it? And it's awful, because if your opponent pays for it once or twice and then they have to get rid of it, then they pretty much just lost 2 action points for nothing. Tangled Koi Fur. Good old Tangled Koi Fur. I'll be the first to admit the Tangled Koi Fur is starting to show its age a little bit. You put it on one of your opponent's friends. Your opponent's friend can no longer move. It's, in this metagame, probably not as good. It's only got 3 power, and it's a little slow, because you really only can play it on one of your opponent's friends that's already at home. Typically, we would play something like Back Where You Began and move it home and then play Tangled Koi Fur on it, but in this deck, it might not work out quite as well. We'll see. I might replace it with something else, but we'll see, okay? We'll just have to see. The reason I'm on the fence about it is because when you actually do pull it off, it does essentially make a card worthless, and I think that's awesome. And finally, Alicorn Amulet. There are a couple of Troublemakers we're going to be running in this deck. You probably already saw them on the list. I like them. I think they're cool cards. You can play this on them, give them 3 more power. Keep in mind, this is a control deck, so we're trying to minimize how many cards our opponent is allowed to have on the field. And if our opponent has a hard time keeping cards on the field, and you just keep making your Troublemakers beefier, it just makes them much more of a nuisance. So here we are at the Troublemakers, and people are probably waggling their finger at me right now, because trust me, here in 2017, these aren't the Troublemakers you're supposed to be running. But you know what? Gosh darn it, I love these 2 cards, especially in a control deck like the one we have right now. Pinkie Pie Grump, first of all. Hey, I'm Grump. She's an awesome card. She only has 3 power initially, but every time a player draws a card, she gets +1 power. So, you know, hypothetically, if you really wanted to be cheesy, you could drop her, and when she flips face up, you could drop a bunch of action points, just draw a bunch of cards and refill your hand, and just make her really beefy, and then just make her impossible to deal with, because it's every time your opponent draws a card too. If you and your opponent each draw a card every turn, this gets +2 power every single turn. If your opponent can't deal with this immediately, it can be possible for this to get so powerful your opponent can never deal with it without the use of an event card. I like that. And we've also got Yellow Parasprite, okay? The OG staple Troublemaker. Now, I don't care how old the game's getting, alright? Discard a random card every single turn. That is a good effect. Now, if this was, granted, if this was your opponent discards a card, then I might say, alright, it might be time to let go, okay? My opponent can just discard some random trash they don't even need. It's not even that useful. But it's discard a random card. So your opponent has no idea what they're going to end up having to get rid of, and it could be infuriating. The less cards our opponent has to play, the less cards are on the field that we have to control. You end up getting 2 of these bad boys in play, and my god, your opponent will strangle you after the match, alright? I've seen it happen. Good people have lost their lives over this card. We are going to use 3 copies of this card. So our starting problem is going to be trading traditions, and seeing this card should just make everything start falling into place. When this card enters play, choose a color at the start of your next turn. Your main character has that color. You use this, you make your Queen Chrysalis purple, and you can flip her over and just have 3 purple in play and have no trouble playing the purple card. The only way this could not be viable is if somehow your opponent, by some freak accident, gets rid of this card, and that's why we have Miss Jury. Lady Justice, guys, I know, Lady Justice, Judge and Jury. I just called her Miss Jury on a whim, okay? Don't comment about it, I already know. Our other one-off is going to be cart crafting. When this problem is solved, each player with at least 1 friend here may put a resource from their discard pile into their hand. This is okay. I could probably bump this up to 2 and bump something else down to 1, but I just kind of randomly chose this one to go down. It's only got 7 requirement for your opponent to beat, and its effect is a little bit, just a teeny tiny bit situational. So, This card, though, this card is the tits. Exhaust your main character, gain 1 action point. The cool thing about this is our main character is not going to have an effect after it's boosted, so we can start using it to generate action points, and that's amazing. On the case, when an opponent starts a face-off here, gain 2 action points. This is obviously just really good for the Troublemaker thing. If our opponent decides to start fighting our Troublemakers, even if they do end up beating the Troublemaker, we get 2 action points out of them just starting the face-off, so that's cool. Unreasonable demands. When this problem is solved, you may banish a friend. That's just lulz, more control. It's pretty awesome, and the cool thing about it is it's one of those problems that our opponent really can't benefit off of. Like, a lot of cards you see like this say something like, you and your opponent banish a friend, or the winner of the face-off may banish a friend, but this is just, if this problem gets solved, banish one of your opponent's friends. Nice meme. The last card on our list is The Show Must Go On. It is a starting problem, and we could use it, but we're probably not going to, like, ever. When a player confronts this problem, that player may banish a card from their hand beneath one of their friends with Pumped. That's awesome because we only have to confront the problem, and we can load up a bunch of cards under Photo Finish. If Photo Finish ends up winning a face-off, you can just get rid of everything. Just shoo, okay? It's just fodder for Photo Finish, and that's amazing. Granted, Photo Finish's effect can only happen once per face-off that you win, but it's still pretty nice to just be able to generate cards with this instead of just going into face-offs, and it makes Photo Finish a little bit faster. So that's pretty much it, guys. I'm pretty happy with how the deck's turned out so far. I can't wait to test it a little bit. If there's anybody out there that plays My Little Pony and wants to play against me, we can play online at tradecardsonline.com. I've started live streaming my matches, so, you know, if you'd like to maybe come in on one of these days, I'm streaming on Tuesday and Friday next week, or technically this week, depending on when you're watching this. You can come in and maybe we could play a match or two, and I'd love to test the deck out. Now, if you're new to the game and this deck looks just completely broken to you, the deck's not completely broken. In fact, this is probably a mid to like maybe mid-high tier deck, I would say, or at least idea. Like when I iron it out, it'll be a little bit higher. But the deck does have a few flaws. I don't want to go too specific on what the flaws are, because if I'm going to be playing this deck against people, I don't want to just give away all of the problems of the deck immediately so my opponent can build a deck around it, because that's not fun. But I know some people out there might be interested in testing the deck out for themselves, and I'd like to give you some ideas about the deck and its problems before you go out and start spending money on trying to build it. First of all, like I said before, the deck is very action point heavy, which is why I have to run the purple engine to get me more action points. You could, hypothetically, like I said before, this deck works perfectly, flawlessly as a white-pink. It's just the deck is a lot slower because you don't have the action points, and having the extra action points lets you also draw extra cards. So if you happen to play out your hand, you can just use your purple cards to let you draw a bunch of more cards, and it's almost like having the draw power from pink, but not as effective. Another flaw of the deck is the reason that a deck like this doesn't see more play is because the cards that you take from your opponent will always be weaker than when your opponent plays it, alright? Let me explain, because to a lot of people it's going to look like you're playing the exact same cards, but in a way you're not. Your opponent has specifically built their deck to work around specific engines, specific combos, so on and so forth. Just taking tiny random pieces of your opponent's engines from them and playing them is not going to be nearly as effective as like the uses that they had for the card. So if you play a card and your opponent plays that exact same card, chances are they're going to get more mileage out of it than you, even though you might throw like a wrench in their gears or whatever. This deck is more about having fun. It's sort of a mind game-ish deck, and I really love it for that. Like, if you're playing against somebody who is just not affected at all by your mind games, then this deck isn't quite as effective, but I still think it's a quite functional deck. Wow, this video is relatively short compared to how I thought it was going to end up, but I think I've pretty much hit the end of what I wanted to say. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help us out. Leave me your questions, comments, concerns, criticisms on the deck in the comments section below. To anybody who doesn't know this yet, until Tuesday, I'm letting people into my Patreon-only group, so if you want to keep seeing MLP content, I highly recommend you head over there because people are allowed to vote on what kind of content they want to see next, so if you want to keep MLP alive, going there is a great way to support the game, and you can also talk to me, talk to other Kudou-kun fans, and maybe even get yourself a game or two on trade cards online. Remember, Tuesday is the end of it. After Tuesday, you have to be a Patreon supporter to get in, so even if you're just a little bit curious, now is a good time. And finally, if you found this video by accident, then subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Until next time, MLP fans, I cannot wait for the new set to come out and render my deck completely useless.